It was just another busy morning at the Manila International Airport. The lines were long, the announcements loud, and travelers rushed from counter to counter. Among the crowd stood a man in a plain hoodie, cap pulled low, a small duffel bag hanging from his shoulder. To most, he looked like any other tired passenger waiting for his flight. But this wasn't just anyone. It was Manny Pacquiao, world champion, senator, philanthropist, and we're flying alone, quietly, without security or attention. He waited patiently in the business class line, scrolling through his phone, when two airport staff behind the counter began to whisper. "Look at that guy," one said under her breath. "He's in the wrong line, probably trying to sneak into business class." The other laughed softly. "He looks like he just came from a boxing gym, not like someone who can afford this ticket." Manny looked up, caught their glances, and simply smiled. A gentle, humble smile that revealed nothing. He handed over his passport and ticket calmly. The staff took it with an exaggerated sigh, rolling their eyes at each other. "Sir," one said mockingly, "are you sure this is your ticket? Business class, huh?" A few passengers behind him noticed the tone. One woman frowned. A man took out his phone and started recording. Manny's voice remained calm. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "That's my ticket." But instead of checking it properly, the staff exchanged smirks. "All right," one muttered. "We'll verify that, sir." She walked off, taking her time, leaving Manny standing there as other passengers stared. He didn't move. Didn't argue. Didn't even look offended. Instead, he turned slightly to help an old man behind him adjust his luggage cart. "Careful, sir," he said softly. "It's a bit heavy." The small act of kindness caught the attention of more travelers nearby. Whispers began. "Wait, isn't that Manny Pacquiao?" Still Manny said nothing. He stood there, patient, humble, letting the moment unfold. Then, just as the staff returned with a smug look on her face, something happened that made the entire terminal fall silent. What Manny did next made everyone in that airport stop and stare. The agent came back holding Manny's passport and boarding pass with a smirk. "Sir," she said loud enough for everyone in line to hear, "this ticket doesn't seem to match you. You're booked in business class, but—" She paused, giving him a slow once-over. "You don't exactly look like a business class passenger." A few people in line chuckled quietly. Others stared in disbelief. The woman at the counter folded her arms, tapping her fingers impatiently. Manny simply nodded. "Ma'am, please check again." "That's my ticket." The staff member rolled her eyes and leaned toward her colleague. "Can you believe this guy? He's insisting like he's somebody." Manny's calmness seemed to irritate them more. They whispered, shook their heads, and laughed softly as they rechecked the system. Across the counter, a mother with her son noticed the entire exchange. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, "isn't that Manny Pacquiao?" His mother shushed him, unsure, watching the tension grow. The staff member looked back up and sighed dramatically. "Sir, I'll need to see additional identification. Do you even have a credit card for this booking?" Her tone was sharp and cutting, almost accusatory. The people waiting in line began to shift uncomfortably. Phones were coming out quietly now. A few were already recording. Still, Manny didn't react. He pulled out his ID, handed it over gently, and said, "Here you go, ma'am." No hint of anger. No arrogance. Just respect. The woman snatched it, glanced at it briefly, and laughed under her breath. "Okay, fine, Senator Emmanuel Pacquiao. Nice try." She smirked at her co-worker. "Must be a fake ID. The real Manny Pacquiao wouldn't be standing here in sneakers." At that, a few passengers gasped. The air in the terminal felt heavier, charged with disbelief. Someone in the crowd muttered, "That's crossing the line." But Manny remained still. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked down briefly. Not in shame, but in reflection. He had been poor once, mocked once, treated like he was invisible once. He knew that feeling better than anyone. He took a deep breath and said softly, "Ma'am, I'm not trying to prove anything. Please just check the system again." She ignored the request and turned to another passenger. "Next," she barked. "Step aside, sir." That did it. The crowd stirred, murmurs turning into audible disapproval. "Why are you talking to him like that?" a man asked. "You can't just skip his turn," another woman said, but the staff held her ground. "Sir," I said, "step aside." Manny nodded, stepped away quietly, and moved toward a corner near the counter. He didn't want to create a scene, but the scene was already happening. Phones were up now, recording everything. The footage would later show him standing there, hands folded, eyes down, surrounded by a wave of murmurs and camera flashes. Still, he never raised his voice. Instead, he walked over to the same old man he'd helped earlier and said softly, "Go ahead of me, sir. Don't worry about me." The old man looked up at him with trembling eyes. "Son, you don't deserve this." Manny smiled faintly. "It's okay. Maybe it's happening for a reason." A few meters away, the mocking staff leaned closer to her coworker. "Let's see how long he keeps that fake ID act going," she whispered. "Unbelievable." The crowd was no longer amused. Someone said loudly, "You should show respect." "That's Manny Pacquiao." The staff froze for half a second, then scoffed. "Oh, please. You really think the Manny Pacquiao would dress like that? He probably has people to carry his bags for him." But before anyone could answer, a supervisor approached, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening here?" she asked, her voice firm. The staff explained, gesturing toward Manny dismissively. "This man's claiming to be a VIP, probably using a fake name." The supervisor turned to Manny, looked into his face, and her expression shifted. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but Manny shook his head slightly, silently asking her not to intervene yet. He wanted the lesson to unfold naturally. And so, she stepped back, unsure, watching quietly. The crowd's tension grew heavier. Phones kept filming. The disrespect had gone far enough, and yet Manny stood tall, his dignity unshaken. He leaned forward slightly and said in a calm, almost fatherly tone, "Ma'am, sometimes the way we treat people tells more about us than it does about them." The woman blinked, confused for a moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" Manny just smiled. "It means you should always show respect, and even when you think no one's watching." But by then, the entire terminal was watching. Every eye, every camera, every witness. And though he didn't raise his voice, his calmness carried more power than any outburst could have. The staff tried to laugh it off, but the laughter sounded hollow now. They had no idea that in less than 10 minutes, this quiet moment of humiliation would turn into one of the most unforgettable lessons of their lives. What happened next changed everything, and no one at that airport would ever forget it. The supervisor lingered near the counter, arms crossed, watching as the tension rippled through the crowd. Whispers echoed across the terminal. "That's really Manny Pacquiao." "No way. Why would he fly alone?" "Look at how calm he is, though." The staff who had mocked him earlier tried to maintain their composure, but the nervousness was beginning to show. One of them glanced uneasily toward the supervisor, whispering, "Why's everyone staring?" "What's going on?" Her colleague shrugged stiffly. "They're probably filming for social media. Just ignore it." But they couldn't ignore it for long. The quiet man they had treated like a nobody suddenly became the center of every eye in that hall. Manny still hadn't said a harsh word. He simply waited, leaning lightly against the counter, expression calm and unreadable. His small duffel bag rested by his feet. He looked like patience itself, the kind that only comes from years of discipline, of struggle, of knowing what true humility feels like. "Sir," the staff member said finally, forcing a laugh, "I'm sorry, but we can't process this ticket until our system confirms your identity. You might have to wait." Manny nodded. "No problem," he said softly. The simplicity of his answer made the laughter in her throat die away. He didn't argue, didn't demand, didn't threaten to call anyone. He just waited. A young security officer walked past, glancing at the crowd. "What's happening here?" he asked, looking at the growing cluster of bystanders. "Nothing, sir," the staff replied quickly. "Just a passenger misunderstanding." The guard looked from her to Manny and paused. His eyes widened slightly. "Wait, is that—" Manny smiled at him gently and raised a finger to his lips, a small, silent plea not to expose him yet. The young guard swallowed and nodded, stepping back respectfully. He understood. Manny's humility was teaching everyone in that room something deeper than any outburst could have. Minutes passed. The crowd thickened. Travelers from other lines craned their necks to see. The whisper spread fast. "It's really him." But the two staff members were the only ones still oblivious, trapped in their arrogance. The supervisor approached again. "Everything okay here?" Before the staff could answer, the computer screen at the counter beeped, a confirmation code flashing in bright green. The name on the booking read clearly, Sender Emmanuel D. Pacquiao, business class. VIP priority. The woman who had mocked him earlier froze. Her eyes darted between the monitor and the man standing quietly before her. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching. Wait, what? The supervisor leaned over, saw the name, and closed her eyes. Oh no, she whispered. Oh no, no, no. The second staffer looked too, and all color drained from her face. Her voice trembled. Sir, you're really? Manny raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. Please, he said. There's no need for that. Silence filled the terminal. The bystanders, now a full semicircle of onlookers, stood still, phones raised, recording history. The first staff member's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. She was pale now, shaken, realizing what she'd done. Manny didn't smile this time. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried something deeper. Not anger, but disappointment, you see, he said softly. A name on a ticket shouldn't be the reason you treat someone with respect. The supervisor tried to apologize, but Manny lifted his hand again. Please, he repeated gently, let me finish. Every sound in the terminal faded. Even the overhead announcement seemed to hush. Manny looked at the two staff members, then at the crowd. I was once a person nobody recognized, he began. I know how it feels to be looked down on, to be told you don't belong somewhere. That pain never leaves you. And I thought, maybe one day when I'm in your place, I'd never do that to anyone. His words hung in the air like a slow echo. The staff lowered their heads, eyes wet with shame. Today, he continued quietly, you didn't know who I was, and that's okay. But the way you treated me, it tells me how you might treat others, those who don't have a name or money or fame. The crowd stood in awe. Every passenger who had been watching could feel the weight of his words. The supervisor swallowed hard. Sir, I'm so sorry. We didn't mean, Manny smiled faintly. Maybe you didn't mean to. But kindness isn't something you do only when it's easy. It's something you live with, every moment. He took his boarding pass, bowed his head slightly to them, and turned toward the waiting area. No anger, no pride, just quiet strength. Behind him, the staff stood frozen, the reality of their mistake sinking in. The people around started clapping softly, first a few, then dozens. The sound rolled through the hall like a wave of respect. The woman who had mocked him earlier bit her lip, eyes glistening. I didn't know, she whispered. I really didn't know. And yet everyone could see when it wasn't about not knowing who he was. It was about forgetting what respect means. But the story didn't end there. What happened next would turn this moment into a lesson the whole country would talk about. The clapping slowly faded, but the echo of respect hung heavy in the air. Some passengers were wiping their eyes. Others looked at the two embarrassed staff members who stood frozen behind the counter, unsure what to do next. The supervisor, her voice trembling, said quietly, Sir, please, if you would allow us, we can escort you to the VIP lounge. Manny looked at her gently. There's no need. I'm fine here, he said. I'll wait with everyone else. The simplicity of that sentence struck like thunder in the quiet hall. He could have demanded special treatment, could have used his power to humiliate those who humiliated him, but he didn't. Instead, he chose humility again. The crowd began whispering, louder now, no longer afraid to speak his name. That's really him. He's so humble. I can't believe they talked to him like that. Near the security line, a little girl whispered to her father, Papa, why are people clapping for him? Her father smiled faintly. Because he just showed everyone what real class looks like. Meanwhile, the two staff members couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Their faces were pale, their hands trembling. The first one, the one who had mocked his clothes, finally whispered, Sir, I'm really sorry. I didn't know. Manny turned back to her and smiled. It's okay, he said softly. Just remember this. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you can't see. Always choose kindness, the woman's eyes welled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Behind them, the young security guard from earlier stepped closer. Sir, he said quietly, I knew it was you. But when you told me to stay quiet, I understood. You wanted to teach them, not embarrass them. Manny patted him on the shoulder. Respect goes both ways, my friend. You showed yours. Thank you. A few more airport employees had gathered by now, drawn by the commotion. Among them was a senior operations manager, who immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. She hurried over, whispering urgently to the supervisor, "Do you realize who that is? Senator Pacquiao. Our staff just humiliated him." The supervisor closed her eyes, guilt washing over her. "I know," she said softly. "But he's not angry. He's teaching us something." The manager approached Manny cautiously. "Sir, please accept our deepest apologies." "We'll take disciplinary action." Manny stopped her gently with a raised hand. "No, please, don't fire anyone." The crowd fell silent again, waiting for his next words. "Let them learn from this. Let this moment remind all of us that power, money, or fame don't define worth. Every person who walks through this airport deserves the same respect I do." A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. Someone began clapping again, slowly. Then another joined in, then another, until the whole terminal was filled with applause. A group of overseas workers waiting nearby stood and clapped the loudest. They knew what it felt like to be judged for their appearance, for their status, for the lives they came from. To them, this wasn't just about Manny Pacquiao. It was about every ordinary person who had ever been made to feel small. One of them shouted, "Salamat, champ!" Manny smiled, lifted a hand, and nodded. "Para sa lahat tayo ito," he said. "This is for all of us." Tears glistened in the eyes of strangers. It wasn't the words. It was the grace in his tone, the kindness that carried more weight than anger ever could. The embarrassed staff stepped aside as the supervisor reopened the counter. Manny's ticket was processed properly this time. The system beeped, printing the boarding pass that had started it all. The same piece of paper that had once been used to judge him now symbolized something far greater: humility, triumphing over pride. He accepted the pass, bowed his head slightly in thanks, and said, "Please, serve everyone with the same heart you'd want others to show your own family." The crowd broke into applause again. Passengers lined up for photos, but Manny politely declined, saying, "Let's just keep this moment between us." He didn't want the lesson to turn into a spectacle, but the world had already seen. Cameras had caught every second of the exchange. Within hours, the video would explode online. For now, though, all that mattered was the silent awe filling the terminal. The first staffer, still holding back tears, whispered to her co-worker, "We judged a man by his clothes, and he showed us what true greatness is." Her colleague nodded shakily. "He could have humiliated us, but he didn't." Manny looked around the hall one last time before heading toward security. His expression was peaceful, almost prayerful. He nodded politely to passengers as he passed. Some reached out to shake his hand. Others simply watched, humbled by what they'd witnessed. As he handed his boarding pass to the officer at the gate, the man saluted him with quiet respect. "Sir, thank you for reminding us what dignity looks like." Manny smiled. "No, my friend," he said softly. "Thank you for listening." And as he walked toward the boarding gate, the terminal seemed to exhale, like everyone there had just witnessed something sacred. It wasn't just about fame. It wasn't even about respect anymore. It was about the reminder that kindness and patience still have power in a world quick to judge. But what Manny did right after boarding left people around the world speechless. A final gesture no one expected. Inside the plane, the hum of the engines blended with murmured conversations. Passengers were still replaying what had happened in the terminal. Some were messaging family, others scrolling through their phones, watching the first clips already circulating online. Manny Pacquiao took his seat near the window. He placed his worn duffel bag carefully in the overhead bin, bowed his head for a short prayer, and then sat back, calm as ever. A few rows ahead, one of the airport staff members, the younger of the two, stood frozen at the cabin door. She had been reassigned to assist boarding for the same flight. Her face was pale. She could hardly look at him. When boarding finished, she approached slowly. "Sir," she began, voice trembling, "I wanted to say I'm sorry again. I didn't recognize you," and Manny looked up, his expression kind. "You don't need to apologize because of who I am," he said gently. "You need to remember to treat everyone with respect, especially those who have no name, no fame, no title." Tears filled her eyes. "You could have gotten me fired," he smiled. "If I did, what would you learn? But if I forgive you, maybe you'll never forget." The cabin grew quiet. Even nearby passengers who pretended not to listen had gone still. Moments later, The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and thanking our very special passenger today, Senator Manny Pacquiao. The announcement drew a ripple of applause through the cabin. The staff member flushed with shame. Manny simply bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the kindness without pride. When the plane leveled off above the clouds, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook. He scribbled a few words, then tore the page and handed it to the same flight attendant who had once mocked him. On the paper were 8 simple words. Respect costs nothing but changes everything. She stared at it, speechless. He added quietly, "Give that to your team when you land. Maybe post it in your break room. A reminder for everyone." She nodded, holding the note to her chest. "Thank you, sir." The passenger sitting next to Manny, an overseas Filipino worker returning to Riyadh, turned and said softly, "Sir, what you did back there, I'll never forget it. They always treat us like we don't matter. Today you stood for all of us." Manny smiled humbly. "No, my friend, I didn't stand against anyone. I just reminded them and all of us that respect shouldn't depend on appearance." The man nodded, eyes moist. "Still, you showed them grace? That's harder than throwing a punch." Manny chuckled. "Grace wins more fights than anger ever will." The conversation drifted into silence. Through the window, clouds rolled endlessly below them like waves of soft white cotton. For a moment, Manny's thoughts wandered back to his childhood, to the days he'd walked barefoot to school, ignored by those who thought poverty meant worthlessness. The memory kept him humble even now, flying above the world that once looked down on him. After landing, passengers filed out slowly. Manny shook his hand, thanking him for the lesson they had witnessed. The staff who had mocked him earlier waited near the exit, clutching the note he had written. When he approached, they bowed deeply. "Sir," the older one whispered, "I've worked here 15 years. I've seen people yell, threaten, demand, but you taught me more in silence than they ever did in anger." Manny smiled, placed a hand lightly on her shoulder and said, "Then today was worth something." He stepped out of the aircraft, greeted by a mix of security and airport management already aware of the incident. Cameras flashed. He politely declined interviews, saying only, "Let's just remind everyone to be kind. That's all." By the time he reached his car, the video from the terminal had gone viral. Millions of views in a matter of hours. Comments flooded in. "This is how a real champion behaves. He didn't just win a fight, he won hearts. Imagine if we all treated each other like this." That night, Manny posted a short message on social media. No anger, no names. Just a quiet reflection. Power is not shown in how loud we speak, but in how gently we choose to act. Within minutes, his words were shared by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary people alike. The hashtags, Nyar Respect for All and Nyar Lesson from the Champ, trended across platforms. At the same time, inside the airport's staff lounge, the 2 employees pinned his handwritten note on the bulletin board. Every worker who passed by read it silently. Some took photos of it. Others whispered that they'd never forget that day. For them, it was no longer just about Manny Pacquiao. It was about how one man's humility had exposed an invisible truth, that dignity doesn't depend on wealth, and real strength is measured by compassion. But the story wasn't over yet. What happened next would bring justice, reflection, and a message that spread across the world. The next morning, the world woke up buzzing. News channels replayed the airport footage. Social media was on fire. The video of Manny Pacquiao being mocked, staying silent, then calmly teaching a lesson had spread far beyond the Philippines. Headlines flooded feeds across Asia and the US. Manny Pacquiao's humility stuns airport staff. When the people's champ fought discrimination without throwing a punch, airline management scrambled into meetings. Phones rang nonstop. The 2 staff members involved were called in for questioning. The younger one, her eyes red from crying, spoke first. "Sir, I didn't mean to insult him. I judged him by how he looked." The HR manager sighed. "You didn't just insult a senator. You insulted a symbol of our country. But what hurts more is that you forgot what respect means." She nodded, voice breaking. "He forgave us. He told me to treat everyone equally." The manager leaned back, shaking his head slowly. "And he still showed you more grace than you showed him." Meanwhile, at Manny's home, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, journalists, and even foreign diplomats wanted interviews. But Manny refused them all. He didn't want attention. He wanted understanding. He sat in his garden reading scripture under the morning sun. A young reporter finally reached him, breathless. "Sir, please, just one statement for the record. The world wants to know what message you'd like to share." Manny looked up from his Bible and smiled. "Tell them," he said softly, "that kindness should not depend on recognition. The moment we treat people better because we realize who they are, that's not respect. That's bias disguised as politeness." The quote spread like wildfire. Within hours, it appeared on posters, tweets, and news tickers around the world. At the same time, the airline's CEO held a press conference. Cameras flashed as she addressed the nation. "We are deeply sorry for the way Senator Pacquiao was treated. But more importantly, we are thankful to him for responding with humility instead of anger. Starting today, all our staff will undergo new training focused on equality, empathy, and non-discrimination." Applause filled the room. It was the first time a corporate apology felt sincere, and it happened because one man refused to retaliate. Back at the airport, the same staff members who had mocked Manny were now working quietly, humbled but determined to do better. They had pinned his handwritten note, "Respect costs nothing but changes everything," right above their counter. Every shift began with a moment of reflection. Days later, something extraordinary happened. Manny Pacquiao himself returned to the airport, not with reporters or cameras, but alone. The two staff members froze when they saw him approaching. He smiled and waved casually. "Good morning," he said warmly. The younger woman stammered, Sir, I didn't expect. I'm traveling again," he said, handing over his passport. "But don't worry, no lessons today." They laughed nervously, still unsure if they deserved his kindness. Manny continued, "I came to see how you're doing." "How's work?" The supervisor, now calmer, replied, "Better, sir. We learned a lot from that day." He nodded. "That's what matters." The atmosphere at the counter was completely different now. Other passengers nearby recognized him immediately, whispering excitedly. But this time there was no tension, only warmth. As his boarding pass printed, Manny noticed something pinned beside his note. A new poster that read, "Every traveler carries a story you don't know. Treat them with respect." He smiled, then turned to the young woman. "That's beautiful," he said. She smiled shyly. "It's what you taught us, sir." Before heading to security, he handed them a small envelope. "Something for your staff fund," he said. They hesitated. "Sir, we can't accept this." "It's not a gift," he replied. "It's a reminder. Use it to make things better for others." Inside the envelope was a donation slip, enough money to start a new Respect and Service Employee Recognition program at the airport. Tears filled their eyes. The woman whispered, "You turned our shame into something good." Manny smiled. That's how change begins. The story reached international media again. But this time it wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about transformation. Airports across Southeast Asia began quoting Pacquiao's message in their staff trainings. Schools shared his story in ethics classes. Even government offices put up his quote in their hallways. When a U.S. journalist asked Manny later why he didn't demand punishment, he said simply, "Justice without compassion becomes revenge." But compassion brings real justice. That one line made front-page headlines. And somewhere, in that same Manila airport terminal, travelers noticed a new plaque near the check-in area. It bore Manny's quote in gold letters, "Power is not in fame or wealth. It's in how we treat people when no one is watching." Manny Pacquiao passengers stopped to take pictures. Some prayed beside it. Others whispered stories of how that single moment changed the culture of the airport forever. The same staff who once mocked a humble traveler now trained new employees on dignity and respect. Each time they told the story, they didn't hide their mistake. They shared it proudly as a lesson. And Manny? He went back to doing what he always did, quietly serving, humbly inspiring. He never bragged, never posted, never sought credit. But everywhere he went, people seemed just a little kinder, a little slower to judge. But the true impact of that day wasn't felt until the next week, when the footage of his return went viral, and the world realized how one man's grace had changed an entire system forever. The week after Manny Pacquiao's quiet return to the airport, the world witnessed something extraordinary. A traveler waiting in line that day had captured a new video, not of humiliation this time, but of healing. The short clip showed Manny smiling, shaking hands with the same two staff members who had once mocked him, and gifting them the envelope. The caption read, "The People's Champ returned, not for revenge, but for redemption." Within hours, the video exploded online. Millions watched, commented, and shared the transformation. It wasn't just another celebrity moment. It was a living example of humility defeating pride, grace conquering shame. News anchors around the world replayed the side-by-side footage. The first encounter, harsh, tense, uncomfortable, and the second encounter, warm, forgiving, powerful. A headline on one U.S. network read, "From Disrespect to Redemption, How Manny Pacquiao Changed the Conversation on Human Dignity." Across social media, hashtags like Nar Pacquiao Lesson and Respect for All trended globally. Influencers, pastors, and activists reposted the clip with their own reflections. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Corporate trainers used it in seminars. It wasn't just a viral story, it became a movement. One tweet, shared over 1 million times, said, "He could have shamed them publicly. Instead, he taught them privately." That's leadership. In the Philippines, airport officials held a press event, unveiling a new program called the Pacquiao Principle. Its mission to train all staff on empathy, equality, and ethical conduct, regardless of a traveler's appearance, wealth, or status. A large banner hung above the podium with Manny's quote in bold letters, "Respect costs nothing, but changes everything." When asked about it, Manny smiled modestly. "If that one sentence can make someone think before they speak," he said, "then that's worth more than any title I've ever won." Even global human rights organizations took notice. Articles called it a rare moment of moral leadership in a divided world. One journalist from London wrote, "Pacquiao showed us that the real champions aren't those who fight in rings, but those who refuse to fight with hate." Meanwhile, the two airport staff members decided to do something remarkable. They wrote an open letter addressed to the public and to Manny. It was published by several news outlets. It read, "We were wrong. We saw a man and judged him by his clothes, but he saw us and judged us by our hearts. His forgiveness changed our lives. We promise to serve every traveler with dignity, as he taught us." The letter went viral too, proof that redemption was not only possible but contagious. Manny read it quietly one morning, sitting in his kitchen. He smiled, folded the newspaper, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." Later that day, he recorded a short video message for his followers. No fancy studio, no background music, just Manny sitting under a tree speaking softly from the heart. To everyone who watched the video, thank you. But remember, this story is not about me. It's about how we treat each other. No one should be judged by appearance, wealth, or fame. We are all human. We all deserve respect. He paused, then added, "The next time you meet someone, look beyond what you see. You never know what battles they're fighting. Be kind, be patient, be fair." That short message reached over 50 million views in 3 days. Comments poured in from every corner of the globe. I cried watching this. The world needs more men like him. Respect should be a universal language. Even airports in other countries began displaying his quote on digital screens and boarding gates. At Singapore Changi Airport, one traveler filmed the message appearing beside flight information. "Respect costs nothing, but changes everything. Manny Pacquiao." It became a global symbol of humility. Months later, a young boy approached Manny after a charity event and said, "Sir, because of your video, I stood up for my classmate when he was being bullied." Manny smiled gently, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and said, "That's how the world changes. Some one act of kindness at a time." And just like that, the story that began with an insult ended as a movement for dignity. The airport staff who once hung their heads in shame now stood proudly as ambassadors of change. The old counter where it all happened became a quiet landmark for travelers. Some took selfies beside the plaque. Others just stopped to read and reflect before their flights. The lesson was simple, timeless, and universal. True power doesn't come from status. It comes from how we use our voice when others have none. That's why Manny Pacquiao's story resonated, not because he was famous, but because he reminded the world of something sacred. Respect is free, but priceless. As the sun set over Manila Bay that evening, Manny looked out from his balcony, the city lights flickering below. Somewhere, a plane roared overhead, carrying passengers who might have seen his story. He smiled faintly, whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, and closed his eyes. The camera of imagination fades out on his calm face. Peaceful, resolute, unshaken, his words echo one last time. No one should be judged by appearance. We are all equal under God. And on screens around the world, the story ended with a call to action.